Today on the Playbook Podcast, President Trump heads to the UK, but all the focus here will be on big developments in the Charlie Kirk case. There'll be all eyes on the Senate this morning as FBI Chief Kash Patel comes in for questioning, and the Federal Reserve Board starts its big interest rate meeting. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Adam Wren, and it's Tuesday, September the 16th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Good morning, everyone. Adam, hello. Let's get into it today. President Trump is headed off to the UK for a 3-day state visit. He'll be leaving in the next couple of hours. We're not expecting much action on that front today. The main events in Britain are Wednesday and Thursday. We may see him this morning on the South Lawn. We may hear from him on the plane, as we sometimes do. But I think even the President of the United States is likely to be overshadowed today by developments in the Charlie Kirk case. And that's because we are expecting to see the chief suspect in the case, Tyler Robinson, in court this afternoon. And ahead of that, we're expecting to hear from Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray, who will be filing charges against Robinson at 2:00 Eastern Time. And there's going to be a press conference at that point laying out the case against the suspect. And at that time this afternoon, the expectation is we're going to learn a lot more about what the authorities actually know about this case, because of course the internet has been awash with rumors and suspicion and accusation and hearsay. And this will be the first moment we really get to see what the case against him actually looks like. And this really matters, Adam, because as Dasha and I were discussing on the podcast yesterday morning, and in fact, as we've heard from senior members of the administration all through the day, a big policy response is coming from the White House to this appalling killing. And so it's really important that everyone understands exactly what happened and what motivated the person that did it and so on, right?
I fear that a lot of people on both sides have had their opinions about what happened in this case hardened in a way that the facts won't change. Even on the right, if you look at Steve Bannon and others, they've been significantly questioning the narrative of just one shooter being involved here. And so it seems like a lot of people are not going to embrace whatever the cold, hard facts that the prosecutor puts together here.
And that's an ongoing problem in public life these days in all sorts of ways, isn't it? Well, we as journalists will certainly embrace the facts. We've certainly heard from figures in authority involved in the investigation, some snippets of information, right? So we heard from Governor Spencer Cox from Utah. He was talking on some of the TV shows on Sunday. He described the suspect as someone who had, quote, a very different ideology to his conservative family. And then yesterday, we heard from the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, and we'll certainly talk more about him in a minute, but just on this specific point, he said that according to all the investigations the FBI have been doing, that this guy, there'd been some text message exchange they seem to have got hold of, in which the guy said he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk. So I assume what we're going to hear today will be more along those lines.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's going to be fascinating, I think, to see whether people sort of accept this. Because it's not a federal case at this point, there's a very great possibility, as our colleagues Josh Gerstein and Kyle Cheney have reported, that the court proceedings will be televised. And so I think this case is going to be with us for a long time to come. We're going to be talking about it for many weeks and months.
The thing I'm particularly interested in from that point of view is the policy response that is coming from the White House and from the Trump administration to this. And that's what we've been speculating on about this podcast really for the last few days, because that's the real political point, is how do they respond to this appalling tragedy, this moment, and one that they all feel so personally and so viscerally. And we're starting to hear, it's still quite vague, but we're starting to hear snippets from people in the administration about what that's going to look like. And what they're talking about, albeit in vague terms, Adam, is some sort of assault on as yet unspecified, quote unquote, radical left-wing groups. And that appears to be where the policy response is heading, although clearly nothing's firmed up in concrete as yet.
Yeah. And Jack, I think that whatever shape this policy response takes, we're already seeing a hardening on the right towards the left here, whether it's something like redistricting, which Charlie Kirk talked a lot about in red states and the importance of doing that. And we're seeing people like Senator Jim Banks, a close ally of the president, adopting that as sort of a cri de coeur, in Charlie's death, saying that we need to get this done for Charlie, for the president. I think that you're going to see that in any number of issues. And the idea that the Trump administration administration is going to go after George Soros and associated leftist groups is fascinating because, of course, if you go back to 2017, we saw a great outcry when the IRS would target conservative groups. Republicans went mad about that. And in some cases, the IRS ultimately apologized in a legal settlement. And so the fact that Vance and others are openly talking about going after the left is something that we should continue, I think, to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And another way that they're talking about going after them, and in fact, going after people individually, people who've gone online and said sometimes hateful things about this crime. Cancel culture is back, right? But this time it's coming from the right. This time we're seeing people getting cancelled for saying awful things, in some cases, about Charlie Kirk and about his death. But we're hearing stuff from the right that a few months ago it would have been impossible to imagine them saying. I was listening to Pam Bondi, the actual Attorney General of the United States, on a podcast talking about how the violence has got to stop, which of course everyone would agree with. And then she said this: there's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there's no place, especially now, especially after what's happened to Charlie in our society, we will absolutely target you, go after you if you're targeting anyone with hate speech. Now, you could have put those words in the mouth of the most liberal administration in the world a few months ago, and people on the right here would have hated to hear any suggestion of clamping down on people for what they said. And yet now we've got a total role reversal.
Yeah, and you heard Vice President Vance, the second in command, on the podcast yesterday as he was hosting for Charlie Kirk, say, quote, hell, call their employers if private citizens are posting what they deem as objectionable content in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. But, it is absolutely cancel culture to say that if people have an opinion that they post online about Charlie Kirk, that they need to be reported to their employers. And it's of a piece with the pushback that we've seen on liberal institutions, whether it's USAID or Harvard or any number of institutions that the Trump administration is going after to get revenge on. And that's been a major theme of the presidency.
I understand how deeply these people are feeling this awful tragedy. It's just fascinating to see such a shift in position over such a short time about something they felt so passionately about. I remember J.D. Vance going over and lecturing Europe just a few months ago about free speech. It's something he obviously holds very dear. So an amazing shift. Adam, we better just move on to another part of this. We mentioned Kash Patel earlier. Really, just by a quirk of the calendar, he has his first appearance before the Senate Judiciary Committee this morning since he was confirmed as FBI director. Now, that was already going to be a blockbuster moment, him appearing before the Senate, firstly because he's been a pretty controversial figure, I think it's fair to say, as FBI director for a number of reasons. Then the whole Epstein saga broke over the summer and he found himself up to his neck in that. And now, of course, he's leading, or at least a key player in this investigation. And he has been criticized for some of his actions in this investigation as well. So you just know that the cable news networks and everyone's going to be tuning in this morning to see how Kash Patel does against what could be quite a spiky committee, particularly on the Democrat side.
Yeah, I talked to some people this past weekend, pretty close to the White House, some Republicans who are very frustrated with Kash Patel. They think he looks amateurish. The fact that there's been reporting that he was at Rao's restaurant in New York the night that this was unfolding, that he had posted that a suspect had been apprehended. And, his defense of himself has been that he's been transparent, that he's moved all sorts of bureaucratic obstacles to get this done. And just objectively, this manhunt did occur quicker than others of its kind in the past. But largely, we believe that's probably because the father turned his son in. And so I think he has a lot of questions to answer for here. And even in some of these interviews that we saw yesterday and the day before, Kash Patel has been struggling, I think, to answer some of the questions and defend himself. He's very defensive on a personal level, using the terms I and me and we a lot. Our colleagues at the Bulwark pointed out in a smart piece. And so this is very personal for him, it feels like. But we have seen reporting that President Trump remains to have confidence in him. And so it's unclear whether he's really on the hot seat with the only person who matters.
He's obviously very loyal to President Trump, and we know that's something he values. Patel did an interview with Fox News yesterday morning, which in itself was pretty fascinating. The idea of the director of the FBI coming out and doing a lengthy interview on a favored cable news network about a very live, ongoing, high-profile case and giving real-time updates on some of the information the investigation has happened, including DNA-style evidence and stuff. He calls that transparency. And of course, he says it's a good thing. I'll tell you in real time what's happening. People deserve to know. Of course, the flip side of that is sometimes he'll say things that aren't actually verified and ready to go out yet. And of course, that's what happened earlier in the investigation when he said they had the guy and then suddenly it turned out they didn't have the guy at that time. So it can be a dangerous game being transparent in the moment when you're running a live investigation.
Yeah, and there are investigative notes that authorities are gathering that may seem helpful in real time, but turn out to be not substantiated by other pieces of evidence. So there's a reason here why law enforcement officials are not transparent at some points about their investigation because they want to maintain the integrity of it. So that's really been challenged in this case here.
You bet. And then, of course, once they've got through that part of the Kash Patel hearing, they're going to turn to the Epstein files or lack thereof. And this would have been the headline moment in this hearing a week ago until the awful events in Utah. But it's still going to happen today. And he's going to have a lot of very aggressive questioning on that because on the Republican side, senators know that their supporters are deeply unhappy about it. The Democrats know that this is a weak spot for the Trump administration and they'll want to press that button as much as they can. I remember watching Kash Patel famously on that podcast a few years ago, long before he was FBI director, when he was asked, why is the FBI protecting Epstein, essentially? And he said, simple, because of who's on that list. And now here he is, a few years later, FBI director saying there's no list, and he's got to answer for it all before the Senate.
Yeah, and I think we can expect to see Democratic members of the committee highlight those instances and really put the squeeze on him. I think one of the big stories of the Senate, of Congress generally, has been the Republicans' inability to stand up to Trump and to be an independent governing body. And so I'm fascinated to see if we'll see any Republicans picking up some of the broader MAGA community criticism and taking that to him, or whether they'll sort of be brought to heel here again. So it'll be remarkable, I think, to watch in real time.
You bet. So loads of stuff happening all over your TV networks today in all of this. What's happening behind the scenes today, we should just mention briefly, Adam. Also in DC is the Federal Reserve is getting together for its big meeting about whether to change interest rates. And this is something that the President of the United States has been looking forward to for a long time, obviously demanding an interest rates cut. Well, the 2-day meeting starts this morning. It concludes tomorrow, and that's when we'll actually get an announcement on whether and really most likely how far they are going to cut interest rates. The fascinating thing about this is that Donald Trump has been trying to change the makeup of the board that makes the decision. As we know, tried to fire one of the members, Lisa Cook, has been trying to install one of his other appointees, Stephen Myron, into a different vacant seat. That all moved very quickly last night. And as things stand at the time we're recording, it looks like both of those people are going to be in the meeting today. Lisa Cook has been kept in her job, at least for the time being. Stephen Myron was confirmed late last night, so he should be in there as well. And so they're both going to be walking in to go and have a 2-day argument about interest rates. Sadly, this one is not going to be televised. And you know we're just all going to be talking about that tomorrow when the Fed makes its decision. All right, we'd better leave it there. Adam, thanks so much for joining us as always. That's all we've got time for on today's show, but we've got loads more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we shall be back tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful day.